In a world where magic powers everything, except our protagonist, Rhaegar, who's just a loser trying to live a quiet, magic-free life. The story begins with Rhaegar, who received a summons from the king of Krisna to come to the capital. So he rushed inside his house, and within seconds he had finished packing his bags and rushed out of the house and told his younger brother that he was waiting for his gift from the capital. So Rhaegar thought he made up some excuse to escape from helping in the harvest because he is scum and useless. A few days later, Rhaegar ended up alone in the desert, lost and on the verge of death, desperate for water. General Balder saw him through his special lens, and as Rhaegar fought death alone, he remembered his difficult childhood, where he was known from a young age as a failure and pathetic for not being able to use magic to control the quartz stones that are used in all industries and from which the combat robots known as golems are controlled. After a while, he saw a motorcycle heading towards him. When Balder reached him, he told him that King Hodor had ordered him to bring him. After giving Rhaegar enough water, he regained some of his useless energy, and Balder marveled at finding him in such a state in the desert. Rhaegar told him that he does not know how to use carts or anything that depends on quartz stones, so Balder expressed his surprise, as he did not expect to meet someone who does not have the talent to use magic, while Rhaegar was surprised that the one who came to save him was the general himself. In the meantime, there was a fierce war between the Krisna army and the Athenian army, and the robots continued to exchange short and long-range attacks until the Krisna army had some advantage and was able to take down the enemy robot, but their victory was not complete after the Krisna robot was attacked and eliminated with only 2 bullets. One of the soldiers tried to hit the robot with his bullets to no avail, and it was quickly destroyed by Commander Zess, so the Krisna soldiers decided to retreat for the time being. More Athena robots joined the battlefield and helped Cleo's robot get up. Then she remembered that she managed to hit the enemy with one of her bullets and felt it was a great achievement for her. But she was quickly discouraged by Lee and thought it was just a lucky shot, and then marveled that they managed to break into a large part of Krisna's territory and all the army sent were 3 old robots. Rhaegar, on the other hand, was excited to find that he had finally arrived in the capital city of Benanteen on Balder's bike. After they passed through the gate, he kept looking around, and Balder wondered if this was his first time in the capital. After they reached the royal palace, he heard a voice calling him from behind and found that it was his friend Queen Sigyn, but he was surprised that she pointed her weapon at him and expressed her displeasure with him for not coming to her wedding to Hodor. Rhaegar tried to make excuses as usual, and then she asked him if he didn't come because he hates them, but he immediately denied it and wondered that this is how she welcomed him even though they hadn't met for 4 years, and he found her hugging him and expressing her happiness to see him after such a long time. In the meantime, some soldiers were watching what was happening from above and were surprised that their queen was already smiling, and they wondered that her friend is a person who does not know how to use magic and the likelihood of his likes is 1 in a million, and they kept thinking about why the king summoned him. When Rhaegar entered the palace, he found his friend King Hodor waiting for him. He was surprised that the citizens of Krisna had put their trust in someone like him to rule, and warned him that he could be sentenced to death for making fun of him. Rhaegar was confused and angry with him and told him that making a perilous journey across the barren desert for 5 days was more than enough for him, and that he deserved a reward for his survival. Then he rejoiced at seeing Hodor's owl, as he had not seen it since it was young. Then he asked Hodor to tell him why he had summoned him, and when he guessed that he might be planning to reconvene the hooligans, Balder wondered what he meant and sat down to tell him about the most riotous situations the 4 of them had caused, and thought that only Zess was left to complete their team. He wondered why they were suddenly silent before Sigyn told him that the major neighboring countries were at war, and that the kingdom of Assam, where they had been studying, had fallen a month ago and was now under the control of the kingdom of Athens. Hodor then told him something that ordinary Krisnians don't know. Their army had participated in several engagements against Athens on the border to defend Nizaran Castle, and they discovered that the commander of Athena's fighting units in the north was their 4th friend, Zess. Rhaegar doesn't believe it at first, as he knows that Zess hates war so much that he voted against his older brother when he was commander-in-chief, but when he sees their disappointed looks, he realizes that what they say about Zess is true. Then Hodor told him that it was only a matter of time before the castle's defense lines collapsed due to the repeated attacks in the north, and then he saw Rhaegar about to leave, thinking that he was telling him all this information just to be careful and go away from the war zone. But Hodor told him that he wanted to help him, and Rhaegar was surprised that he asked for his help, even though he knew very well that he did not know how to use magic. So he asked him to follow him somewhere, and after they left the room, Balder felt curious about Rhaegar as he had the king's absolute trust. Sigyn told him that he is their friend from their academy days, and at the same time he is the only person in the academy who was able to stop the feud between Hodor and Zess. As Hodor and Rhaegar walked around the capital, he remembered that his father had spent a lot of money to enroll him in the military academy because he believed that his magic would be awakened one day, and called him a fool. Hodor told him that he was a great father because he tried to change his son's destiny and defied fate when he couldn't do that right now. After a while, they came to a place underground where there was an old robot covered in snow. Then Hodor told him that this robot was discovered a month ago when the soldiers were doing their usual excavation work and discovered that it was more than 1,000 years old, which is why he was asked to come to the capital, and Rhaegar almost wet his pants when he saw a corpse lying next to the robot. Hodor told him that it was the body of the pilot they found inside the robot, and suspiciously, they did not find any sign that he used magic, which made them conclude that the robot cannot be controlled by magic like other military robots, and they need to try different methods. Then Hodor asked him to help him do research on the robot so that they can work on developing their robots better. Rhaegar realized that he intends to go to war against Athena and advised him to surrender because there is no way they can win against Athena's forces. Then Hodor told him a secret that no one knows, which is that he does not mind surrendering and that Athena has already sent him the terms of surrender. Rhaegar felt relieved that they would not have to fight a war, but his feelings soon turned into a shock when Hodor told him their terms, as they stipulated that all Krisna lands belonged to Athena, in addition to withdrawing all ranks and privileges from the nobles and executing all members of the royal family. Meanwhile, Athena's troops invaded the capital and started attacking with everything they had, causing panic and chaos among the citizens, and Krisna's robots started falling one by one. But Hodor and Rhaegar didn't feel anything because they were underground. Then Rhaegar felt that they were in deep trouble because of the unreasonable conditions, and he couldn't think, and he was angry that Hodor treated it as normal and told him that this is why Zess was always attacking him all the time. Suddenly, one of the soldiers told them that they had to escape immediately. As soon as he finished his sentence, the robot fell, causing the part that Rhaegar was standing on to shatter, and he clung to the ice robot to keep it from falling into the abyss. Then Rhaegar ordered Hodor to leave the place immediately before it collapsed and had to leave with his soldiers. Then he tried to cling to the robot, but he ended up entering the cockpit by mistake and tried to exit the robot, but he pressed the quartz control button by mistake and could not understand any of the system's English language. In the meantime, Hodor reached the surface and found the Athena robot led by Lee waiting for him after taking many lives, and when she noticed Hodor, she decided to get rid of him to bring honor to the Athena forces by causing the death of the king directly. But before she fired her bullet, everyone was surprised by the appearance of the robot from underground, as if it had been waiting for this moment. No one expected a war robot to emerge from this area, especially since it is an old robot, yet it was able to jump to a high altitude while Rhaegar has no idea how he was able to operate the robot and fly it. Then he was surprised to see a robot from Athena in front of him and realized that he would have to fight it, and Lee attacked him, and then he found it difficult to move the robot's leg, and he tried several attempts until he was able to rush towards her and take her down with one blow. Rhaegar couldn't believe he'd survived a fight against an Athenian robot and hoped that whoever was inside wasn't dead. He sat down and thought about what would happen if he got up again. He examined the inside of the robot to see how it worked and was able to move it toward the weapon and grab it. When he saw that Hodor was still around, he asked him to leave and call for reinforcements, but he found that he couldn't hear him from inside the robot, and suddenly he was attacked by Zess, causing him to fall to the ground, and when he saw Hodor, he decided to capture him. Just as he is about to destroy the robot, he is surprised to learn that the person inside is his old friend Rhaegar. At first, he thinks that Hodor is trying to buy time, as it is impossible for someone who does not know magic to be able to pilot a robot. Meanwhile, Rhaegar remembers the academy days when the three of them were together and was thinking of dropping out, when Zess scolded him and told him that by doing so he would prove that what the idiots say about him is true, and reminded him that he managed to get through 2 years of school despite not knowing how to use magic. Hodor then told him that Rhaegar would have to stop studying for financial reasons. Zess left in anger, and when he returned to reality, he found that Zess intended to capture Hodor in order to end the war between the two kingdoms, so he tried to talk to him to make sure it was really him, but he couldn't communicate with him. Rhaegar had no choice but to use force, and that's when the clash began. While they were fighting, some reinforcements arrived, led by Baldar, who managed to inflict significant damage on Zess's robot, but was able to head towards Lee and help her get back up, then decided that they had to retreat before they were surrounded from all sides. Baldar, on the other hand, realized how strong and smart Zess is in dealing with difficult circumstances and decided to let them retreat and focus on protecting the king in the first place, while Rhaegar managed to get out of the robot and tried to catch up with Zess, but to no avail. In the evening, the soldiers were inspecting the damage to the robots. Sigyn walked over to Rhaegar and asked him if he was able to fight with the robot. She kept checking him and he told her he was fine. When she asked him how he was able to move the robot, he replied that he had to move it manually and began to explain to her how it went inside. So she asked him to write a report for her about everything that happened since he entered the cockpit. Meanwhile, Zess was sitting absent-mindedly until Cleo interrupted his thoughts by giving him some food that she had prepared, and when he asked her to put it next to him, she felt angry and remembered that he didn't eat his food last time when he told her that. When Cleo protests, Lee pulls her head back and tells her that she will be swapping night watch shifts with Arga. Cleo tells her that her only skill is being able to operate the robot for so long that she has to take over the night watch, and there's nothing else to be proud of but her large breasts. After Cleo leaves, Lee expresses her concern about the robot that suddenly appeared during their battle against Krisna, as it was moving in a way that was unusual for a robot. In the evening, Krisna's army was working on repairing the broken robots while Rhaegar wandered around watching what they were doing until he fell asleep and asked Sigyn how long they planned to keep working. She told him that they are currently equipping a reactor robot with a harder quartz stone. He wondered if they were going to take these stones from the old robot, and she said that they are unable to dismantle the internal structure of the robot from the outside, so they may have to destroy it. She then began to explain to him how robots are made, and through the methods of making robots, she tried to analyze how the ancients were able to make a robot with such different specifications, and concluded that the ancients may have made the robot hastily for a final task. Then she decided to rewrite the report again because it didn't make sense to her. Rhaegar felt frustrated that all the effort he had put in would be in vain. Then she asked him how he got to the surface with the robot, and he replied that he jumped up. She approached him and told him that without any form of acceleration, there was no way the robot could have jumped that high. He told her that's all that happened, and she realized he was telling her the truth. Then it occurred to her to ask him about the robot landing, and she asked him to at least tell her what he was feeling, but in this situation he was embarrassed by her getting too close to him and told her that he was still a man even though he lacked magic. So she walked away and ordered him to rewrite the report himself without drawings. After that, the army welcomed the return of General True, known for his immense strength, and vowed that he would not allow Athena to do whatever she wanted while he was there. Then he ordered them to get rid of the old robot as it became an obstacle in their way. But when one of the soldiers told him that the queen was doing some research on it, he decided to postpone the matter. Rhaegar felt sorry for the robot because everyone treats him rudely and tried to imagine the suffering he has suffered since they discovered him. And when he returned to his room, he remembered what Zest said during the battle and felt that there was nothing left for him to do in the capital after he'd helped the army do research on the old robot. At sunrise the next day, Zest decided that the army would continue their attacks on Krisna's robots and made a plan to damage at least 20 robots, hoping that Hodor would surrender before the situation got worse. On the other side, everyone woke up to a surprise attack by Athena's army, and the soldiers were unable to operate the old robot. Rhaegar tried to help them by showing him how it worked, but soon felt they were in trouble when Sigyn told him that Zest had started attacking again, so he decided to try to operate the robot himself. After he gets it working, he asks Sigyn to tell Baldur to buy him some time to talk to Zest and convince him to pull out. Then he goes inside the robot and drives it out. The fighting between the forces of Athena and Krisna continued, with Athena's forces having the advantage as they had a plan to exploit Krisna's weakness to their advantage, as Zest intends to attack the capital while most of Krisna's army is busy defending the castle, and Zest thought he was close to getting Hodor. In the meantime, Athenian army General Locus was meeting with the commanders in the capital areas to discuss the heavy losses incurred by the kingdom due to the war and their failure to destroy 50 enemy robots, and they thought to tell their people, contrary to the reports, that the losses are minimal and there are only a few injured soldiers. But Locus told them that the real issue was time and that they had to end this war before other armies got involved, and decided to engage General Borcuse as a last resort. The council then received word that the Zest division had successfully launched raids on Krisna's capital. They felt some hope that things were going in their favor and considered the successful conquest of Krisna's capital a great achievement, while Locus was furious that Zest acted on his own to get the recognition he wanted. On the other side, the Krisna army made its plan to defend the capital and prevent the enemy from advancing further into it. Then they began to distribute themselves around the castle from all sides, while some soldiers tried to stop General True and told him that some robots are only a prototype that has not yet been tested, but he insisted on using it and testing its capabilities on the battlefield. When Baldur asked him to stay behind the walls, he became angry, and Baldur told him that he only takes orders from the king and wanted to give him advice, but True decided to ignore him and focus on testing the prototype robot. Baldur suggests that they join forces to protect the kingdom, as the king expects them to do. True laughs at him and accuses him of being incompetent, which is why the enemies have been invading them all this time. Before he leaves, he tells him that his squad will go out and protect everyone. In the meantime, Zest's forces managed to destroy 3 out of 20 robots. He thought about having Elect lure the rest of them to follow him, but Elect told him that they seemed to have received strict orders not to leave their places. Elect then went out to check if the capital gate had opened and found a single robot of unknown design coming out of the gate. When Zest noticed him, he realized that he was a messenger since he was wearing a red and white badge, and decided to go to negotiate with them. Elect marveled at the flare of Zest's nerves, although he was able to maintain his calm in the darkest battles, even when he brought down the kingdom of of Assam, while Zess remembered his first meeting with Rhaegar when he saw a group of students bullying him, and when he approached them and called one of them for a one-on-one fight, they fled immediately. Rhaegar then thanked him for saving him and told him that he despises those who gather to fight someone alone, and he despises cowards like him, and when he asked him if he would fight them if it was a one-on-one fight, Rhaegar replied that he does what his father taught him, which is not to pick fights as long as he can take a beating. Zess angrily asked him what he would do if they decided to beat him to death. Rhaegar got angry and told him that it wouldn't have gotten that far before he started to leave. Rhaegar was curious as to why everyone was deliberately harassing him. Rhaegar thought it might be because he was different from the others, and Zess told him that he wouldn't be harassed anymore if he stayed close to him, and from then on they became friends. When Zess arrived at Rhaegar's robot, he found him waiting for him outside. Rhaegar was surprised to see Zess emerge from his robot with a weapon in his hand. Then he wondered how he was able to move the robot when he does not know how to use magic, and Rhaegar asked him another question, which is why he wants to conquer the kingdom of Hodor. Zess replied that he has the right and justice in the war between the two kingdoms, and he does not have the power to stop the war, as its seeds were already planted by the great powers of the kingdom of Orland after they supported some of the people who participated in creating the civil war in the kingdom of Assam. Then he added that the reason he was attacking them was because the Orland forces responsible for the rebellion had passed through Krisna's territory, making their country complicit in what Orland had done, and Rhaegar was surprised that Hodor would even think of such a thing. Zess tells him that he knows Hodor doesn't care about such things, but he ended up being involved because Orland took advantage of the joint military maneuvers between the two countries. Unfortunately, the three of them are no longer the students they once were, so they can sit together and discuss what is right and logical in this matter. Rhaegar asks him if he agrees with the conditions Athena has imposed on Hodor. Zess is unaware of his country's conditions for surrender, and before he realizes it, he notices one of his colleagues pointing out to him in a certain way that Krisna's forces are moving towards war. Realizing that his negotiations with Rhaegar were a waste of time, he immediately went inside the robot, pointed his weapon at him, and told him that the fall of Krisna was inevitable, and that he would give him one last chance to come back and convince Hodor to surrender. Then he added that the man who will lead the next campaign for Athens is Borcuse, who has never been defeated in any war, and advised him to convince his country to surrender before they waste their lives in vain. On the other side, the Athenian soldiers noticed 15 robots appearing at once, and soon the two sides began to clash. Rhaegar remained standing in front of Zess, confident that he would not dare to shoot him, while Zess begged inside him to return to the castle and convince Hodor to surrender before things got worse. When his count was up, he did not hesitate to shoot him, causing him to lose his balance from the top of the robot, but Rhaegar managed to cling to it, head inside, and start driving the robot to escape. Zess followed him and continued to attack him, but everyone noticed that he was too fast, and then General Balder ordered the gates to open and his troops began to leave, and one of them ordered to go to help Rhaegar, and then the soldier noticed that Rhaegar's robot was very fast and wondered if he was afraid or wanted to go to a certain destination. After a while, Athena's forces had the advantage over Krisna, having lost 6 robots, and surrounded them from all sides. She suggested to General True to retreat and join the rest of the ranks, but he got cocky and found that he could handle the 3 people in front of them. Cleo, on the other hand, was unable to aim at any of the enemy robots and felt frustrated and useless, according to Lee, until she finally managed to hit True's arm, forcing him to drop his sword. True ended up being forced to retreat after his robot lost an arm, and with Athena's forces gaining an overwhelming advantage, they decided to take advantage of it and follow them deeper into the capital. In the meantime, Rhaegar hides behind the mountains, frustrated that he lost the bet between himself and his friend, who didn't hesitate to shoot him. Then he finds one of the boxes inside the robot appearing in red color, and as usual, he doesn't know what it means due to his ignorance. Then he was surprised that Lee appeared in front of him after she found him and decided to take revenge on him for robbing her of her chance to eliminate the king, but she was shocked to find that the robot had jumped an enormous height without using acceleration and surprisingly landed in one point without using his hand, and I thought that if Krisna had more of these robots, they could breach the walls of the capital of Athens in a blink of an eye. She decided to make sure to destroy this robot and started firing her missiles at it and thought that she could get him easily, but she was surprised to find that he was still holding his sword with one arm in front of her advanced level missiles. Sigyn couldn't believe that he was able to hold his weapon with one arm despite his injuries, while Lee was eager to inflict more damage on him, but he lunged at her and she was shocked that he used his spear as a hammer to attack her. Rhaegar was thinking that he would have to get closer in order to get to her. One of his problems was that he couldn't communicate with anyone while he was inside the robot. Lee managed to break his sword and reach his body, and after firing a bullet through the robot's upper body, she decided to do the same thing again to make sure it was destroyed, but she was surprised when he took her arm with a surprise attack and she immediately retreated. Rhaegar kept watching the red counter decreasing, which increased his tension, and he kept thinking about how he should evade the fight before it reached 0, so he had no choice but to flee, and when she followed him, him, she was surprised that she lost her balance and the robot fell. It turns out that she was tripped by Dan, a soldier who joined in to help him overcome her. When he found him not answering his questions, he remembered that he was not a magician, so he could not use the megaphone, and told him that he came to help him on the order of Balder. Dan shoots at her to make sure she's dead and is surprised when Rhaegar stops him from continuing the attack. After he objects, he tells him they're in the middle of a battle and can't take prisoners, so Rhaegar suggests they ignore him and go on their way. While they were talking, Lee took advantage of their inaction and managed to hit Dan's robot and bring it down. Rhaegar became enraged and rushed towards her, hitting her with his spear from a distance and causing her a lot of physical damage. Then he approached and told her to surrender. Lee tried to summon her remaining energy and pressed the speaker to call him a filthy barbarian, then decided to end her own life rather than let him take her hostage. Before Rhaegar could reach her, he heard the sound of a bullet piercing her head inside the robot. On the other side, Balder's squad was struggling with the speed of Athena's robots, while Zest found the terrain unfavorable and ordered his squad to retreat to the rendezvous point after making sure they destroyed 7 Krisna robots. Rhaegar, on the other hand, returned alone and disappointed after Dan died because of him, while Cleo was waiting for Lee to return when her teammates realized she hadn't seen what happened, and Zest blamed himself for letting Rhaegar escape. When Hodor saw how upset Rhaegar was about being involved in this war and having blood on his hands, he decided to make up his mind to surrender, but Balder told him that he would not accept it and asked to give his army a chance to defend themselves. In the meantime, some soldiers were working on deciphering the symbols carved into the old robot's body and felt sorry that they would have to dismantle it before it got a name, as it seemed to them that it was no longer fit for warfare. Rhaegar then tells Sigyn everything that happened to him, and she realizes that Athena is only telling one side of the story to future generations. When she tells him that the one who caused her death is 15 years old, he asks her to stop reminding him of it and heads to his room. Zest noticed that Cleo was still inside her robot, and Elect told him that she and Lee came from the same school, where Lee was the valedictorian and always got the best grades, while Cleo spent her time trying to read the future and get rich. When Zest blames himself, Elect tells him that it's not his fault and that Lee made her own decision. Zest says that he has a 2-year-old daughter at home, and whenever he thinks about the possibility of her going to war in the future, all he can do is treat her with kindness. Elect was curious as to why Cleo was allowed in their squad despite her lack of skills, so Zest changed the subject and talked about how the commanders considered their version of the robots to be so flawed and poorly made that most generals refused to offer to test it. Elect told him that he almost went crazy when he drove it for the first time and took a month to get used to it, and was amazed when he mentioned that it took Cleo only 1 day to be able to control it well. The next day, Sigyn asked Rhaegar to talk privately after he finished breakfast, but she was surprised to see him pack his bag and get ready to leave. He told her that staying here wouldn't do them any good, so she decided not to stand in his way and said her goodbyes. Dan's wife came to visit him at his grave, and he felt ashamed standing in front of her. Before she left, she asked him to try to stay as long as he could because she believed it would make him happy. After she left, he sat in front of his tombstone and told him that the good thing at the end of his story was that he left a child behind, while he didn't think he could have a girlfriend or even a brother. Then Balder's visit to the grave interrupted him and told him that his coming here showed that he felt responsible for what had happened. Rhaegar was furious before telling him that he didn't take responsibility for his death and justified that he had come to say a few prayers for his soul. He realized that Hodor was right about him when he told him that Rhaegar hides behind lies in times of pain. Then he said that the king told him about his father and that he broke down when he learned that he could not use magic, although he sold all the agricultural machinery that depends on magic and began to plow the land with his hands to show him what man can do. Then he told him that Dan's death was no one's responsibility and asked him to stop blaming himself, so he pretended not to care much about it, and when he was about to leave, he found Balder asking him to participate in the next attack, but Rhaegar refused and told him that for him it was nonsense, and then he had to tell him that Hodor had decided to surrender after Athena sent her full terms. He felt angry and expressed his unwillingness to see Hodor fall, and at the same time his inability to do anything for him. Balder said that Sigyn still believes in the underground robot and is working on repairing it, and despite his begging him to fight alongside them, and that he is the only one who can use the underground robot, Rhaegar refused to be the reason for sending his friend to be executed by his other friend and left feeling very angry towards himself. After exiting the capital gate, he turned to find Hodor behind him, telling him to at least say goodbye, saying that he had no intention of pressuring him to stay by their side and that he would not have asked him to come in the first place if he knew that Athena would arrive in the capital so quickly. Then he gave him some money and asked him to accept it as a parting gift, not in advance like last time. He remembered when Rhaegar had to drop out of school due to financial issues and asked his father to do something about it. When he found out, he looked angry and told him that he wasn't going to ask him for money even if the debtors were trying to bury him in the ground. Rhaegar felt embarrassed as he recalled his pathetic memories, while Hodor told him that he was ashamed of himself at the time, but at the same time time he felt happy, and then he extended his hand to shake it, and Rhaegar hesitated to shake it, but did so knowing that this was the last time he would see him. As he left, he remembered everything that had happened over the past few days in the meaning of the words engraved on the robot's lower chest, which means changing fate. Then he remembered his father's words to him that it is okay to run away sometimes because there are things in life that one cannot handle, and advised him to run away and not look back when the situation gets worse. But then he felt that he had to go against that advice and decided to stay and fight alongside his friends. A few days later, General Borcuse sits and enjoys listening to his daughter Lita play the violin and admires her playing skills. When the maid tells them that they have a visitor, she rushes to the balcony and is overjoyed when she sees Colonel Ao. Afterward, the three of them sat down to lunch together, but Lita kept staring at Ao the whole time as if it was the first time she'd ever seen a human being eat, and Borcuse asked him if he still spent most of his time in the army and hadn't found a girl to spend his time with. Ao felt embarrassed and told him that chaos is the only thing he gets from his superiors. Then they sat down to talk about work, and Borcuse realized that the alliance of Krisna and Orland could pose a great danger to their kingdom. Then Ao told him that General Locus wants him back in the army more than ever, as he was ordered not to continue judging the events of the Assam War. When Borcuse learned that the command of the forces tasked with subduing Krisna had been transferred to him, he decided to participate in the war and left the house with him, telling his daughter that he would return as soon as he did every time, and promised her that he would attend her concerts and that Ao would be with him. In the past, Rhaegar tried to climb a tree inside the academy to save a young bird that had fallen prey to a cat, but each time he slipped down, and his anger grew when he saw that the cat was humiliating the young bird. As Zess watched, convinced that it was normal for prey to fall victim to a predator, Rhaegar told him to try to help him. Then Hodor joined them and offered to help him by giving him a piggyback ride. Rhaegar was grateful and called Zess arrogant. Then they recognized each other and Hodor helped him up the tree. As soon as he was able to carry the bird, the cat caused him to lose his balance and fall from such a height. Zess tells him that the man on whose back he had just climbed is the heir to the throne in his kingdom. Rhaegar is so confused that he is willing to give him the bird as a gift in exchange for forgiveness, and the three become friends. In the meantime, Hodor decided to appoint Rhaegar to work under General Balder to be in charge of the lower robot, and gave him the Raiken sword himself. Then Rhaegar went to command the lower robot after the modifications, and the soldiers saw that his movement was uncoordinated due to the weight of the equipment, while Rhaegar only thought about one thing: defending his homeland against Zess. On the other side, Zess sat thinking about what Rhaegar had told him about the terms, and wondered if there were other terms besides the ones he was aware of. He was sure that Rhaegar was trying to tell him something during the negotiations, and wondered why Hodor refused to surrender despite knowing the power differential between the two countries. His thoughts were interrupted by Elect, who came to tell him that they only had enough ammunition left for one battle, but Zess decided to go ahead with the plan and told him that they would launch a third attack on Kresna's capital and then return to the border. Cleo finally woke up and told him the story she had heard about Kresna before and vowed to fight them to the last breath and destroy the black robot. After she left, they realized that the story she had told them did not exist in their time. The next day, Sigyn began explaining to Rhaegar how the new robot would work, as the extra armor she had fitted it with would reduce its combat efficiency by 80%, but it would be able to shed the extra weight through the torque generated by the weapons. Then I told him that the strange counter on the right side is for the robot's mobility, and when the red color reaches the finish line, the robot will automatically stop, and it will take a full day to regain its mobility, and it will have 10 to 30 minutes to perform maneuvers. Then she told him that he doesn't have to kill anyone during his battles. He said in a frustrated tone that he had already caused the death of 2 people. She told him that their deaths were not his fault, but he was very sure that he was the one who got rid of them, and he told her that at the time of Dan's death, he wished for his enemy to die with all his heart, which prompted him to aim his spear at him to save his life. When she asked him if he thought the same thing about Zess, he replied that he had no chance against him since no one could beat him in a battle, and remembered when 4 of the Academy's instructors teamed up to beat him in a mock fight and failed. After he exited the robot, Balder told him that enemy movement had been detected and announced the start of their mission. He then warned him that trying to capture the enemy alive was much more difficult than eliminating him, and that trying to keep his enemy alive would likely cost him the lives of 3 of his comrades. On the other side, Athena's forces began to carry out their last mission and head towards the capital to launch a final attack, while Rhaegar went inside the lower robot and began to lead it, at which time Zess came out of his robot and began to check the place around him, and soon he was surprised that he was caught in Krisna's trap and he and his comrades were trapped. He decided to cancel the mission and ordered them to retreat to the border. Despite their rapid retreat, Balder decided to start the mission early so that they could catch them. The Athenian forces were surprised to receive heavy damage from Krisna's robot attacks, and Cleo fell as the first casualty. Zess decides to buy time for his squad to retreat and distracts them. Krisna's army is surprised that he was able to take down 2 of the robots alone. When Cleo's robot regains his balance, they continue to run away until they reach reach an open field. Then Argeth felt as if someone was trying to approach them even though the place was completely empty, but they were shocked to see Rhaegar's robot heading towards them at high speed. So Argeth decided to protect the rest from behind, while Rhaegar thought about what to do against 4 enemies alone. Argeth tried to do some damage with bullets, but ended up being torn to pieces by the underground robot rushing towards him. Rhaegar wondered if he had caused the death of those inside him, and as he began to feel guilty, he rationalized to himself that his enemy's death was not his fault as Balder had told him beforehand. Zess, on the other hand, decides to stop him and not run away while the others support him from behind, but they feel they are in trouble when they realize that their bullets do not affect him, while Zess manages to do some damage to his extra armor, and Rhaegar realizes that it is Zess who is shooting at him. Rhaegar senses that his shield won't last long at this rate due to his accuracy, so he decides to counterattack. Unfortunately, Zess runs out of ammo before he can shatter the shield, and Rhaegar discards his shields so he can jump high above them. Zess realizes that this is Rhaegar's robot and orders his comrades to retreat. It's mano a mano, and Rhaegar rushes at him with the intention of destroying his cannon so he doesn't have to get rid of it. But he was surprised that Zess was able to read his movement and avoid it, and then he felt that he would die at their hands. Then he thought to use his sword to bounce back to Zess again, and he succeeded in planting his sword in the body of his robot and left it before it reached Zess's body, and they both ended up falling to the ground. After they both fall to the ground, Rhaegar tries to make sure that Zess is still alive. Just then, support forces arrive from Krisna, so Lek decides to stay with Zess and orders Cleo to retreat to the border alone, but all she can think about is her desire to get rid of him and avenge her comrades. Then she disobeyed Lek's order and rushed towards Rhaegar at full speed and kicked him away from Zess and did not give him a chance to defend himself and continued to attack him until he fell to the ground. And then Balder ordered his soldiers not to shoot indiscriminately so as not to damage Rhaegar's robot. Cleo decided to play bait to give Lek time to help Zess. Then she created a big sandstorm around her and then suddenly rushed out of it and managed to surprise one of the robots, cut off its head and rushed it towards another robot and knocked them down. She took the sword of one of them and stood in front of the rest, while Elect headed towards Zess's robot and tried to be careful in removing the armor, and after he removed it, he found that he was still alive but suffering from several injuries. On the other side, Cleo continued to take out Krisna's soldiers one by one with her surprising combat skills until she reached General Balder, who easily blocked her and scolded his followers for panicking over a single fighter. When they began to clash, Balder managed to cut off her arm with a single blow from his sword, and she retreated away, and then Elect ordered her to retreat immediately after he managed to take Zess with him up the hill. But the Krisna soldiers did not let her escape and kept firing at her while she dodged them until one of them managed to hit the robot's leg and prevent it from flying. Elect was surprised by the arrival of another reinforcement battalion and found himself in an awkward situation when she begged him to take Zess and leave her alone while the soldiers pulled Rhaegar out of the lower robot. When Rhaegar regained consciousness, he found Balder standing in front of him and asked him what happened to Zess. He replied that the good news for him was that he was able to escape, and he felt relieved that it was over without heavy losses. Balder then told him that their army was still fighting on the border and that it was only a matter of time before General Borcuse arrived, and that what had just happened was just the beginning. In the evening, they managed to capture Cleo, who was proud to have destroyed the lower robot despite her arrest. She was taken to Hodor, and when she saw Rhaegar nearby, she realized that he was the one who had commanded the black robot and caused what happened to Zess and Lee. The next day, the people of Athens saw Borcuse's robots coming out to prepare to fight against Krisna. Locus wondered if the people were proud of the robots for fighting a country that served Orlan's ambitions and goals. Borcuse wondered if he had doubts about the war, and Locus replied that the people didn't know that Athens' quartz reserves were running out. Then he added that they will have to find a new land rich in quartz to conquer, which leaves them no choice but to control the entire continent. Borcuse told him that he is in favor of war against Krisna, especially since they have an overwhelming advantage due to the dispersal of the Orlan army, and then Locus entrusted him with the future of Athens, and Borcuse decided that he would decide the war in favor of his kingdom. In the meantime, the leaders of Krisna held a closed meeting. Narvi objected to the idea of taking an enemy soldier prisoner and did not think she had the right to participate in such a meeting. General True praised her for her courage and firmness and decided to leave the meeting with her. After they left, Balder thought that the information they would get from Cleo would be very valuable to them, but they would have to be careful not to mistreat her, and when he asked for Rhaegar's opinion, he suggested that they send her to Athens. Sigyn thought she might commit suicide during her time with them and suggested that they leave her in her own care. Balder agreed to her suggestion in the hope that they could use her. On the other hand, Krisna's forces arrested a soldier named Jurge and ordered him to take command of the robot within a week, as he is one of the pilots who can can operate it along with Narvi. Then one of the soldiers told him that he might be sent to work under Balder, who is in charge of the lower robot, and he said sarcastically that he was worried that he would accidentally cause the death of one of his comrades as had happened in the past. Sigyn then took Cleo to her room, and while she was thinking that she wouldn't tell them anything even if they tortured her to death, she was surprised when she was ordered to unlock her handcuffs and invited her to enter the room, and then told her that this is her interrogation room. Sigyn introduces herself, and when she asks her name, Cleo answers without thinking. Sigyn realizes that she belongs to the Sabra family and gives her back the binoculars with her family insignia to gain her trust. Cleo felt that the queen didn't look like someone from Krisna, as she didn't behave barbarically, but at the same time she decided not to let her influence her and told her that she wouldn't say a word. Sigyn told her that she would stay in this room doing whatever she wanted and would not be allowed to leave until she told them what they wanted to know. She expressed her curiosity about the new robots they had built and wanted to know some things about Zess. Cleo asks her if she deliberately didn't take out Krisna's soldiers even though she took out 5 robots, as she seems to be a high-level fighter to be able to control a newly built robot so well. Cleo approached her and pretended to be drinking tea, then suddenly pushed her onto the bed and grabbed her, marveling that Sigyn was weak despite her age, then took her weapon and ordered her to take off her clothes and give it to her so she could escape. In the meantime, Rhaegar was sitting with the Black Owl and trying to feed him, but her pride would not allow her to eat from the hands of a fool like him, so she pretended to attack him and flew out of the castle, at which time Hodor approached him and told him not to worry about her. Rhaegar was surprised when he told him that Cleo was 12 years old, as her body didn't look like a child. He wondered what kind of food was served to the people of Athens to report so quickly. On the other side, Sigyn was forced to undress completely. Cleo ordered her to call the guards outside without making a fuss, then she stripped the guard and disguised herself so that she could leave with Sigyn without arousing suspicion. She asked her if she thought she could escape to Athens on her own, but she did not answer and remained silent. Cleo pulls Rhaegar back and hides behind a wall, thinking to get rid of him before he realizes they're there, but to her surprise, an owl appears out of nowhere and lands right on top of him. Rhaegar was furious and threw it away and threatened to pluck its feathers if it did it again, but the owl didn't care about his threat and continued to stand over his head, so he told it that it was getting heavy now that it had grown so big. He started talking to her about their memories together and told her that the 4 of them used to take care of her when she was just a chick. Cleo was surprised when she realized that he was Zess's friend in the past and that he used to take care of the owl despite his arrogance and sometimes volunteered to look for her. Then he remembered his last battle against him and that he almost caused his death and wondered how they came to this point of hostility and hatred. Cleo couldn't bear to hear any more from him and decided to show herself and assassinate him, but she was shocked to discover that Sigyn's gun was empty and she ended up surrounded by the guards, and Sigyn told her that she couldn't shoot anyone and that it was just a disguise, and she realized that this is the reason for her leniency and allowed her to steal the gun effortlessly. After Elect returns home, he devotes his time to treating Zess's injuries, telling him that all he can do is first aid and apologizing for having to leave Cleo behind to make sure he survives. The next day, Rhaegar found General True enjoying his time playing with the children at the orphanage. Narvi told him that he spends most of his fortune contributing to the orphanage. When he asked her if she had lived there as a child, she refused to answer and told him to concentrate on driving his robot. He told her that he didn't want to take instructions from an orphanage kid like True. She was furious and called him a perverted but he went on his way as if she hadn't said anything. In the evening, Cleo sat looking around Sigyn's room, and when she returned, she found that she had brought with her all the documents and books containing the robot's plans, and Sigyn wondered that she did not care that she brought such confidential information in the room, while Cleo wondered why she kept it with her despite what she had done. Cleo replied that she had learned from what happened yesterday that she had never eliminated a human being before, and that she didn't mind her staying in the same room with her, then approached her and warned her that she wouldn't get out of Krisna safely if she ever laid a finger on Rhaegar again. The next day, Narvi took out her anger on True after learning of his decision to exclude her from contributing to the defense of the western border and put her on standby in the capital, and he tried to justify it by saying that he assigned her to another task and did not exclude her completely. She told him that he would not be able to take care of himself without her because he was a hopeless case. He said that he had nominated the most distinguished soldier in his squadron to take over, and then she received an order from Queen Sigyn to take command of the squadron responsible for the defense of the capital. Sigyn then told her that she would take orders directly from the king and that her team members would be her older brother Niall and Logen in addition to Rhaegar, then told them that their team would be complete with a 5th member, although she objected to this particular person as it would be the red-haired Jurge. When they went to the battlefield, Rhaegar was surprised by a surprise attack from above. Then he found a robot standing at the top of the mountain, which turned out to be Gurge, who was impressed by his dodging his projectile and then rushed towards him without giving him a chance to prepare and continued to attack him until he managed to split his his shield in half. Enraged, he forced Gurge to drop his sword and picked it up to counterattack, but Gurge managed to shatter the blade using his spear as a shield. So Rhaegar decided to retreat to a safe distance, and Gurge used his pistol to fire a barrage of heavy projectiles at him. Rhaegar had no choice but to dodge them by running away, but unfortunately he tripped while running, and the robot fell to the ground and ended up trapped by Gurge, who managed to dodge a surprise attack from Narvi and told him that she did not allow them to train in this way. Gurge was surrounded by the entire Narvi squad until Niall appeared out of nowhere and pointed his spear at the robot's head. Gurge had no choice but to surrender, telling Niall that he didn't want to kill him now and that he used this training to get better control of the new robot. Narvi was confused that she would be responsible for someone like him on her team, while Rhaegar was distracted by his ability to effortlessly slice his armor in half. Sigyn interrupted his thoughts by asking if he was okay with Gurge joining them. Rhaegar thought that his decision wouldn't change much anyway. He had already decided that he would do whatever it took to force Athena to back out of the war and promised her that he would succeed. In the evening, Balder joined him and asked him about his first meeting with Gurge, to which he replied that he couldn't understand how he thought. Then Balder told him that he opposed the idea of releasing him at first, and Rhaegar realized that everyone hates Gurge. Balder told him that he caused the death of one of his training colleagues a year ago for no reason at all, and Rhaegar wondered if he was under his command at that time, but was surprised when Balder told him that Gurge is his only son and asked him not to trust him no matter what, and to get rid of him if he noticed any strange behavior. Balder warned him that if he didn't, he would be the one to die, so he told him that a father shouldn't ask someone else to get rid of his son, and told him to do it himself if he insisted. When he was about to leave, Balder told him to make up his mind the next time he met him if he wanted to understand him or get rid of him. The next day, a group of troops under True's command set out for the western border, cheered on by the people. On the other hand, Rhaegar devoted his time to training under Narvi and was beaten by all his colleagues in order to learn new skills. At the end of the day, he met with Hodor and asked him to promise not to accept Athena's terms until he returned from the war. Hodor told him that he had decided to cooperate with Orland and get military support from them until his return, and Rhaegar continued his efforts by practicing for days with his band until it was time for him to leave. And then Sigyn remembered when he had to leave school in the past and returned to work with his father to plow the land, and thought that she did not mind her husband being a farmer, but she hid her feelings for him all this time and watched him go away. Sigyn woke up in the middle of the night thinking that it was time for Rhaegar to leave again. Rhaegar got ready to leave his room, but was surprised to find her waiting for him outside and wondered if she was angry with him for some reason. She told him that she was just upset, but not because of him. He felt confused by her suspicious behavior, then suggested that he try to relieve her in some way, and she replied that he should return alive so that her discomfort would disappear. Meanwhile, the clash between Athena's forces and the True Squad began, with Athena's forces having the overwhelming advantage thanks to Borcuse's leadership, and the Krisna soldiers were shocked that their leader was defeated by an Athena soldier, and his robot was completely destroyed. After the battle, the general is impressed with the soldiers' fighting abilities and their success in stopping the main enemy force of 50 robots. On the other side, the Krisna army receives the report of what happened in the western frontier battle, and that the entire True battalion was wiped out by Athena's forces. One of the Athenian soldiers was furious with the fighter Nike, who stole the limelight and praised from them for beating the Krisna battalion commander by herself, so Nike jumped on top of him and deliberately fired a bullet near his ear to scare him. When Colonel Io came, she turned into a delicate child and told him that she was very scared while fighting against Krisna. Io praised her performance in the battle and told her that she did well despite that, and that she would be honored at the ceremony when they returned to the capital, then gave the soldiers 4 hours to rest after working for a whole day, and then resumed their attack again. In the meantime, Krisna's army received a report about Athena's army and their numbers, and they thought that they could use the difference in numbers to their advantage and beat them, but Commander Elsa told them not to rush into a decision. The general then ordered his soldiers to be ready to attack at any time. When the Athenian army began to attack, the Krisna army met them with a barrage of shells. The Athenian army moved tactically, and Balder was surprised to see the Borcuse robots lined up and ready to launch from a distance. Elsa thought about attacking them, but Balder stopped her from doing so, telling her that it looked like an obvious bluff, but she saw this as an opportunity to do serious damage to the Athenian army and ordered 10 robots to join her attack. Balder decided to give her 10 more in exchange for retreating if she sensed any strange movement from the enemy. Elsa does not hesitate to rush towards the Borcuse battalion and crush them. She manages to catch the general himself and hit him with an attack. However, he destroys her weapons thanks to his quick wit, and without realizing it, Elsa feels his blade pierce her body, and the situation turns upside down, and Elsa's squad ends up completely destroyed, and it turns out that the tactic of Athena's movements was a planned trap for them. When Balder received the news that Elsa's squad had been annihilated, he realized that this was the reason why Athena's soldiers had stopped moving and were not protecting their leader. He couldn't believe that Elsa had been defeated defeated by only 6 robots and sat down to think of a way to restore the soldiers' psychological balance after they had fallen into a state of panic. Borcuse, on the other hand, felt triumphant because his crazy plan had paid off and he had managed to psychologically destabilize the enemy. He ordered Nike to raise Elsa's torn body in front of them and was sure that Krisna's soldiers were paralyzed and would end up destroying them in any case. Balder, on the other hand, turned his soldiers' fear into rage and ordered them to attack to retrieve Elsa's body. Borcuse realized that Balder planned to die fighting, and the Athenian army ensured their victory in the battle. As Balder and his soldiers approached Borcuse, Io and his followers greeted them with a surprise attack, and the clash between the two sides reached maximum intensity, and suddenly the Athenian army was shocked to see one of their soldiers die from an unexpected attack. Rhaegar appeared out of nowhere leading a miniature robot and shot towards them like an arrow, tearing the robots to pieces, causing heavy losses to Athena and disrupting their formation. The commanders couldn't believe that only one robot could play the role of reinforcement for Krisna's army. As Rhaegar was being bombarded with shells, he remembered Sigyn's instructions on how to retreat, and after the robot's second layer was destroyed, he decided to continue his attack to become a real fighter. Rhaegar is forced to use the robot's original form, and the Athenian soldiers are stunned to see him leap to a great height and start fighting at full strength. Then he discovers that arrows don't affect their robots. When they tried to target him as soon as he landed, they were attacked by Logen, who acted as a sniper and told Rhaegar to retreat immediately. Soon after, Narvi's squad arrived on the battlefield after feeling the earthquake caused by his robot. The plan is to use Balder as bait for the new squad while they take care of the right side of the Athenian forces and take out 20 robots at once. As they start moving, George stands still and tells them that he is so terrified that his feet are frozen, as it is his first time in a real battle. Rhaegar and Logen manage to destroy Athena's left side. Then Rhaegar finds that he can only continue fighting for 6 minutes before the robot is paralyzed, while on the other side, Narvi and her companions try to raise George's morale to show his scary side against Athena. He told them that the scary side of him was showing because he knew the enemy very well and was not in a real fight. Then they felt that they were in trouble after the Athenian army discovered their location and lost the advantage of surprise, and when they thought of retreating, I told them to keep advancing so that Balder would notice their presence and support them quickly, and they had to leave George behind. On the other side, Borcuse was amazed that a single robot with a broken blade could turn the tide of the battle in his enemy's favor. At the same time, Rhaegar was able to locate him. During the fight, Io decided to accept Balder's challenge and come out of hiding after learning that Krisna's army was moving to the right flank, but he was stopped by Bades, who had to leave George behind. In the meantime, Narvi's team manages to take out 2 of the soldiers, and while she's excited to crush her enemies, she's surprised that they've withdrawn from the battlefield and feels angry that she didn't have enough fun. Rhaegar, on the other hand, was surprised by Borcuse's sudden retreat, and as he thought about chasing after him, he remembered Sigyn's instructions not to engage in any combat when the robot's movement time reaches 5 minutes. Nike, on the other hand, objected to the decision to retreat. She thought it would be better to stay and crush their enemies after securing victory, but Bades told her that they do what is known as a tactical withdrawal until they reorganize and come back to fight again after the arrival of reinforcements. Borcuse realizes that this time the sniper is George, who doesn't hesitate to jump towards them and slice the Nike robot in half. I was shocked that he's using the same type of robot as the Zest squad. Then they realized that they were stuck in the corridor after using the Nike robot as a shield so they couldn't attack it. So Borcuse decided to attack Nike to force him to leave it, and then he was amazed by George's accuracy as he managed to destroy his weapon with a single bullet, so he told them not to underestimate him. When he jumped to the top of the mountain, he found one of the soldiers following him and attacking him at close range, and on the other side, Rhaegar had no choice but to continue standing there to avoid being killed, and he kept watching the area around him until he was able to find George, and was surprised to see him engage an enemy soldier who was suddenly attacked by Borcuse, who managed to tear his weapons apart with only a few blows. In the evening, George returns to the army camp, and when Narvi asks to hear his report, he tells her that he ran away when he found himself in a state of panic, and after he felt better, he continued wandering until the enemies found him and attacked him, and he ended up running away again until he reached the camp. Narvi was surprised that his words contradicted what Rhaegar had told her, as he had destroyed 7 robots alone. George found himself in a bind and could not make up any more lies, so Narvi decided to ban him from carrying any weapon or using the robot without her permission. Then one of the guards interrupted them to ask George to come with him to do some maintenance work on his robot, so she decided to go with him to make sure he didn't do anything rash. As he was walking, he ran into his father Balder on his way, but he continued on without paying any attention to him. Balder then told Rhaegar exactly what happened a year ago and told him that he was on a mission on the border when he learned what his son had done, and upon his return, he made sure to visit him in prison every day to check his true intentions. But he stared into space the whole time, and when their eyes met, he laughed sarcastically. Then he learned that he had caused the destruction of 9 robots of his colleagues without a single scratch. And when it was over, he quietly surrendered himself, and Rhaegar wondered how he knew about the story. Although the soldiers died, and Balder told him that only the owner of the first robot died, while the rest survived, and they did not find anything that indicated any malice or hostility between him and them. Rhaegar was still thinking about it when he was interrupted by the sound of a side conversation about the death of General True and the taking of his body by the enemy. Balder was curious to see how Narvi would react to the news, and if she would be able to maintain the same level of thought. When Niall told him that she would most likely collapse, Balder thought that in that case he would have to choose between giving Loden command of the division or hiding the truth from her until the end of the war. On the other side, the Athenian army was inspecting the damage caused by Gurg's attack before he fled, and Nike vowed that she would make sure he died and annihilate the entire Krisna army next time. And after hearing the battle report, they considered it a draw due to their underestimation of the enemy forces. The next day, Narvi came and told Gurg that it was time to move and gave him permission to use his robot. After arriving at the battlefield, they found that Borcuse had moved towards Big Mountain. Rhaegar remembered that there was a village near the mountain and thought if Borcuse intended to attack its inhabitants. When Narvi asked what he knew about this village, he told her that it was his village and that his younger brother lived on the edge of the village. She tried to reassure him and told him that he would be able to escape if the village was attacked. Rhaegar remained distracted for some time before he decided to rush to the lower robot and head to the village to save his brother, ignoring Narvi's orders to retreat. After he reached the village, he found it in a deplorable state where everything was destroyed around him, so he kept looking for Rhaegars everywhere until he was shocked by the bodies of the people spread along the road. Then he was surprised by a surprise attack from the Athenian army after they managed to lure him and trap him inside the village alone. Then he found Borcuse revealing himself and telling him that he did not expect to meet him inside the village. Then he descended to the ground and ordered his followers to lower their weapons to face Rhaegar man to man, and Rhaegar was surprised by his suspicious rush towards him and had to use all his available defenses to stop his attack, while Borcuse found the way he defended himself interesting and made him want to see more of him. Rhaegar jumped towards him and prepared to launch a thunderous attack, but Borcuse easily dodged it and waited for him to land and managed to destroy his spear. So Rhaegar tried to attack him with what was left of his weapon, but he was surprised that he could destroy anything with his fragmented weapon. Although Borcuse had the advantage in the fight, Rhaegar continued to advance and attack, not wanting to give up, but ended up disarmed by Borcuse's counterattacks. Then Borcuse deliberately knocked himself down while defenseless to see his reaction and told him that he would never have such an opportunity again to get rid of him. So Rhaegar felt compelled to ask him why he chose this particular village, and Borcuse began to provoke him and told him that the ruins and corpses he sees around him are an example of the inevitable outcome of the war between them. Rhaegar is confused when Borcuse realizes that there is a reason why he came to the village alone and tells him that he came too late. Rhaegar then rushes to attack him, and Borcuse takes the opportunity to carry out his plan, but soon fails after Rhaegar realizes his intention to get rid of his arm. Borcuse pushes him away so that he can get up. Rhaegar takes advantage of his laxity and manages to hit him with several arrows at once, knocking him down, but he is surprised that he can still move after deliberately falling backwards to minimize the impact. Borcuse asks Rhaegar if he intends to run away despite the enormous potential inside his robot, and then rushes at him without giving him a chance to think. Rhaegar has no choice but to attack with everything he has, and finally succeeds in destroying part of his weapon, although Borcuse, with his expertise, manages to counterattack and knock him down. Borcuse then expresses his displeasure that he didn't make the right decision to run away, and that it caused him to lose his enthusiasm for the fight, and orders his followers to tie him up, and decides to take the robot away and get rid of Rhaegar, as his interest has now shifted to wanting to fight Gurg, the owner of the red robot. Meanwhile, Narvi and the others are watching from a distance and trying to figure out how many enemy soldiers are in the area as they begin to dismantle the robot to get Rhaegar out and dispose of it. But when Rhaegar regained consciousness and found himself surrounded by soldiers, he tried to escape as fast as he could, but he was surprised that he couldn't fly after being chained with more than 5 chains, and to make matters worse, he had 6 minutes left before the robot lost the ability to move. Narvi's squad intervened to save him and started firing at them from a distance. When their ranks were scattered, Rhaegar took advantage of the opportunity to get away, and once they were sure he had escaped, Narvi decided to retreat. When they reached a safe place, she kicked his ass for acting on his own and threatened to blow his head off if he disobeyed her orders again. Before they could continue their escape, they were surprised by a mass attack from Athena and realized that they had been flying all this time. Before the Narvi squad could regroup, they were surprised by the leaders of the Athenian army engaging them directly and ended up trapped and forced to fight an uncertain fight, while Gurg fought against Nike in front of Rhaegar, who tried to convince him to run away and return to the rest. Dirge laughed at him and told him that everything that is happening here is his fault after he acted on his own and failed to find his brother. In the Crescent capital, the troops evacuated more than 80% of the citizens, while Hodor was frustrated that despite General True's sacrifices, the advantage still favors Athena, so one of his followers asked him to restrain his emotions and told him that no one will be able to take away their freedom so easily. Meanwhile, Balder was walking near the meeting room when he heard the news that Athena's forces had crossed the Mizraim fortress and were now on their way to the citadel. Hodor then decided to gather the remaining citizens who had not been evacuated in the inner citadel. Then he was surprised when he was informed that Rhaegar went to his village after learning that Athenian troops were attacking it to save his brother. He wondered what happened to his brother, and when he did not find an answer, he realized that he did not survive and threw his cup away angrily and decided to contact the front lines to order all the troops to return to the capital. On the other side, Rhaegar had to face Dirge, who told him that he had heard a lot about him when he was behind bars and that he had caused the death of his colleague who rushed to save him and began to manipulate his nerves to force him to feel guilty and told him that they were the same in this matter. Then he told him not to worry about it because only fools and weak people die because their survival burdens society as a whole, and the same goes for the Narvi band. Rhaegar then realized that he is just a scumbag and a traitor who doesn't care about other people's lives and attacked him. On the other side, the Narvi squad was facing death against the strongest soldiers of Athens. Niall tried to penetrate Eo's armor, but he blocked him in time, and then he was surprised to lose his arm and head with 2 blows from him, and he ended up falling motionless, so he realized that it was the end and asked him to end it painlessly. In the meantime, Rhaegar and Dirge began to clash, who noticed that his arm had been reinforced with external armor and could not be broken, and when Rhaegar succeeded in destroying his weapon, he told him not to get too cocky. On the other side, Narvi was in a fierce fight against Nike, who was attacking with all her might until she managed to surround her and aimed to destroy the cockpit to get rid of her, so she had to escape outside the robot without Nike noticing it, and after a while she thought she had managed to defeat Narvi. Rhaegar is disgusted with Dirge and tells him that he sees him as a spoiled brat who can accomplish anything he wants, unlike him, and is useless when it comes to fighting while everyone else is doing their best. Dirge asks him why he wants to fight, as he wants to know the secret that he keeps to himself, which is his true desire to continue fighting. He is confused when he remembers Sigyn's last words to him, and then surprised when Dirge tells him that rumors between them have started to spread throughout the country. Then he began to express his admiration for her indescribable beauty and told him that many men had tried to approach her in the past and offered to help him fulfill his desire if he could overcome him. When he told him that he would storm the palace and kidnap her, he began to get nervous and then tried to pretend to be cold and said that he was only fighting to protect the capital. When they resumed fighting, Rhaegar knelt down on his right knee to give himself a defensive advantage. Dirge mocked it as a strategy only used by those who don't know how to use magic, then lunged at him and vowed to smash his robot, but Rhaegar decided to stay low and hold him off until the right opportunity presented itself. Dirge continues to kick him hard until he manages to damage one of the shields, and when he uses his arms, Rhaegar catches him and tells him that he is angry that he is repeating the same words as his father about those who die in the war. And then Dirge is surprised by his rush to attack him and tells him that his desire that he wants him to fulfill after he defeats him is to become a general and surpass his father. Then, to their surprise, the crazy Nike intervened in their fight and focused all her attention on Rhaegar's robot. He noticed that his robot was about to be paralyzed and then saw Nike jumping towards him and about to take his life. Dirge tackled her, smashing his head and tearing the robot to pieces. Before he could take her life, he was attacked after the Borcuse squad arrived on the scene and told them that he was disappointed that they had ended up in such a place with no way to escape after he had gathered his elite followers to finish them off. Rhaegar finds himself trapped and unable to move for 24 hours as the Borcuse elite rush towards them to finish them off. Dirge kicks him down to face them alone, and the elite squad is amazed at Dirge's ability to anticipate and adapt to their attacks. Suddenly, Dirge managed to hit the Orlan's robot with a super bullet that split the robot in half and killed it. The others were horrified that he had broken through the Orlan's armor with one shot, but Daphne told them that he was a loser anyway and wouldn't have been accepted into the army if not for his family's influence. Then they all set out to attack Dirge at once. He and Telton destroy each other's armor. As they begin to launch a mass attack on him, Dirge realizes their plan and deliberately gets as close to Telton as possible so they can't attack him. Daphne decides to attack them together, and Telton tells him to get rid of him if necessary. Dirge is surprised to see him lying on the ground and then notices Leto aiming her gun at him, so he doesn't hesitate to shoot her and smash her robot's head while she deliberately shoots his leg. Dirge fell into the elite's trap, but Daphne got scared when he stared at him at close range. Then Borcuse appeared in front of him and advised him to surrender before the situation got worse, but he took the hard way and continued to fight them until he managed to get Telton and then Ban. After he got rid of most of the elite group with only one leg and one arm, Bades offered to join the ranks of of Athens to use his skills in the application of justice, but Gurge did not hesitate to refuse his request, and after seeing the bodies of his soldiers scattered around, Gurge offered him to join Krisna, and Bades became furious and destroyed his other leg. Then Bades rushed towards him and tightened his grip on him, confident that all his tricks had run out, and decided to take the opportunity to take his soul now. For some reason, Rhaegar was able to move the lower robot and fired his arrow at Bades before his blade reached Gurge, but he only managed to destroy his outer armor. Suddenly, Rhaegar began to fall into the abyss after the edge he was standing on shattered, so Bades decided to ignore him and focus on finishing Gurge, but he found him already out of the robot and pointing his gun at him, telling him that Krisna does not deserve to have a man like him in their ranks, and tried to convince him to join Athens one last time before he was killed, telling him that he would think about it before firing his last bullet at him. Meanwhile, Athena's reinforcements arrived on the battlefield and watched their leader die in front of their eyes, which made them feel a great anger and rushed towards Gurge as a group and fired a barrage of shells at him, but he had no choice but to surrender to his inevitable fate and stood in front of them bravely despite Rhaegar's cries for him to escape. But he chose to help him before he died and fired a bullet into his hand to fall and not be noticed by the reinforcements. After some time, Rhaegar regained consciousness and found Balder carrying him on their way back to the capital, and when he remembered Gurge's self-sacrifice to save him, he hesitated to tell him what happened, and on the other side, the capital's defense forces were prepared to wait for the arrival of Krisna's army to provide them with the necessary support. In the meantime, it became clear that the Athenian army preferred to spare Gurge's life and take him as a prisoner of war. Borcuse expressed his dismay that someone as talented as he was belonged to the enemy and told his followers that their plan would remain unchanged and that they would continue to move forward to overthrow Krisna. He then began to question him, asking him why Rhaegar was assigned to command the black robot, which obviously contains technology from ancient times. He sarcastically replied that it was because he was a foolish man, at which point Borcuse took his life with a bullet in the center of his head. Io then tells him that Krisna's forces are holding Cleo captive and must retrieve her to gain a greater advantage over the enemy. Borcuse orders the troops to prepare to march on the capital at once. In the evening, Rhaegar is forced to tell Balder of his son's death, and when he learns that 90 robots are on their way, he realizes that Borcuse wants to use the darkness to attack them without them being able to locate them, and decides to return to the capital before the Athenian army arrives. On the other side, Narvi found Lodin and Nile alive, although their robots were destroyed, but Nile's robot is still standing and can move, so they decided to return to the capital before Athena arrives to support the rest of the troops. In the meantime, the advisory council met in Krisna to discuss the strategy of evacuating the citizens and providing them with the basic necessities of life until the end of the war, and while they were considering whether or not to ask Orlin for help, Hoder thought that they could not escape their inevitable fate, so they decided to return to the capital before Athena arrived. Balder, on the other hand, warned Rhaegar that they might have to fight a battle before the lower robot was ready for use and told him to help him hide in a safe place by then. In Krisna's capital, Sigyn received a large shipment of hard quartz stones, and when she began to grind them with the automated mills, they seemed too hard for the mills to cut, so her assistant suggested an easier way to polish the stones, transport them to her ship full of the latest equipment, and let her take over. At sunrise the next day, Sakura was able to determine the number of Athenian soldiers coming to invade the capital, estimating it to be at least 90 robots, and finding that Balder's forces had not yet returned, she decided to take over the city's defense with her own forces. When Athena's forces approached the gate, the two sides began to clash, and Krisna's defense resorted to firing from a high distance to prevent them from breaking through the gate. Meanwhile, Cleo saw her army coming to the capital and clashing with the defense forces, so she decided it was time for her to participate in the invasion. After that, Ao tried to sneak into the gate to break through it, while Leto provides him with rear cover, and on the other side, Borcuse succeeded in reaching the roof, and Sakura engaged him directly, but she did not last long, as she fell from the top of the wall, and the Athenian army managed to open the gate and bypass their defense line. Then Balder's forces arrived and rushed to prevent them from entering the city. Athena's army continued to advance, taking out Krisna's soldiers one by one, and Borcuse tore apart Sakura's robot and gained the advantage for himself, while Krisna's army desperately tried to stop his troops. Meanwhile, Sigyn returns to her room and is surprised to see Cleo in her uniform. She tells her that she is working on weapons to destroy her country's robots and will deliver them to Rhaegar as soon as he returns because he promised to come back. She then expressed her desire to make promises with her, even though it was impossible. Cleo couldn't help herself and rushed to embrace her before leaving the room. On the other side, Rhaegar decided to use the lower robot to return to the capital. Although he would only be able able to use it for 1 hour. Meanwhile, the Athenian army completely crushed Krisna's defense. Borcuse and his followers climbed over a mountain of corpses to cross the wall, and Sakura gathered her remaining strength to defend the borders of the capital and prevent them from penetrating, while Rhaegar waited until he could operate the robot as long as possible, imagining how his village died at the hands of Athenian forces, and then flew high to return to the capital as fast as he could. When the Narvi squad arrives at the capital, they find that the northern gate has already been breached and a mountain of shattered robots in front of it, while Athena's forces continue to advance inside the capital and use buildings to avoid attacks. Sakura desperately tried to prevent Borcuse and his followers from entering the city, but he told her that she had failed in her duty. The moment they were able to enter the capital, their armor was shattered by Rhaegar's arrows, and he rushed towards them, engaging them in direct combat before they could harm Sakura. When he came face to face with Borcuse, he rushed to attack him, but he kept dodging him and told him that he did not intend to fight an unarmed robot and considered it a waste of time, although Rhaegar continued to attack him by all means, so he directly confronted him and began to attack him in return. Rhaegar felt that he would lose his armor at this rate and kept retreating until he was surprised by falling off the wall, but he managed to grab hold of one of Borcuse's arms and went back up again, at which time he was able to take his arm, while Borcuse realized that his robot had superior abilities despite Rhaegar's apparent ignorance of them. Borcuse found his fighting style incomprehensible to him, while Rhaegar kept trying to close in on him and fight him at close range, exchanging attacks until he was exhausted. On the other hand, Cleo managed to sneak out of the room, and on her way she encountered Ao's robot. She told him that she was a Zest soldier, and he told her that he had come to take her back to Athens and carried her up to the robot and then flew her away from the palace. Suddenly, Io was attacked by Narvi, who was eager to eliminate him after she recognized him. In the meantime, Sigyn finished making Rhaegar's deadly weapon, and while he was suffering against Borcuse, he was surprised by her appearing in front of him and telling him to go pick up his new weapon. Borcuse is excited to test the weapon's power while Rhaegar tries to pick it up and wave it around, but has difficulty at first due to its heavy weight. On the other side, Narvi drops Io's robot, and when Cleo falls from above, he tells her to run away while he takes care of Narvi. When he resumed his fight with her, he was able to take her down despite his injuries, but her team intervened just in time, and Niall rushed towards him and gave him a resounding blow, then sealed the deal by plunging his spear into the cockpit to make sure he couldn't move, but the rest thought he had caused his own death. Meanwhile, Rhaegar struggled to fight with his newly made weapon, and Borcuse taunted him as a stubborn amateur, but then he gathered his strength and managed to land a medium-strength blow on him as he dodged it. On the other side, Hodor came out of the palace worried about Rhaegar, who is fighting for them because of him, even though he lacks magic and doesn't know much about the robot he commands, and told his followers that standing on the palace balcony is nothing compared to what Rhaegar is doing on the battlefield. Rhaegar then manages to tie Borcuse up with his weapon and pull him towards him. When he tries to cut him, he discovers that his bonds are so strong that his sword is unable to tear them. When Rhaegar knocks him down, he throws one of his shattered blades at him and takes advantage of his distraction and rushes with all his might to attack him. After inflicting heavy damage, Borcuse continued to run him over until he punched a hole in the robot's lower armor and ordered Rhaegar to show himself to him. Before he could get a good look at his face, Rhaegar gathered his strength and swung his weapon to evade him. Then he jumped high and put all his strength into landing on Borcuse with his weapon. When the moment was right, he thought he had managed to dodge it, and before he knew it, the weapon pierced his leg and completely destroyed his armor. Borcuse felt that it was the end, so he decided to die fighting for his last drop of blood, and he came out of his robot and started shooting at Rhaegar, who did not hesitate to crush him with one blow, while Borcuse remembered his promise to his daughter to attend her party before his head was smashed. When Rhaegar was sure of his death, he fell helplessly next to him, and everyone couldn't believe that he managed to defeat the commander of the Athenian forces himself. After the news of Borcuse's death spread to the army, they decided to retreat to reorganize their ranks, and when the news reached Loquis, he gave an order to retreat. The next day, the news reached Zes, and he was relieved when he learned that Cleo was alive and was able to return to Athens, while Narvi became hysterical upon learning of True's death, and Niall could not control her, which prompted Logan to force her to lose consciousness. On the other side, the medical team took care of Rhaegar's injuries, which helped him to get up, and when he saw Sigyn, he told her that he was back again as he promised her, and then told Hodor that he knows that this is not the end because Zes will come back again and they will have to fight him. Then he was surprised when Rhaegar appeared out of nowhere in front of him, stunned that the person driving the lower robot was his useless older brother, and scolded him for not coming home since he traveled to the capital, forcing him to go out and look for him himself. Rhaegar realizes that he has no idea what happened to their village because he left before Borcuse's attack and bursts into hysterical laughter, thinking that he has been avenging his own death all this time, and at the same time, he is overjoyed that he is unharmed.